Hi everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with a special Judicial Watch presentation on investigating the investigators. We have an expert panel here today to talk about the issue. For those of you who don't know, Judicial Watch is a nonpartisan educational foundation that investigates and uncovers government corruption. We are second to none in using the Freedom of Information Act to uncover what the government's been up to, and we've taken the lead in exposing the Spygate targeting of President Trump, the deep state attacks on President Trump through Spygate, and on top of that, we have the many lawsuits on the Mueller investigation and what's behind that. With the collapse of the Mueller report, or the collapse of the Mueller investigation, now people are wanting to uncover what has been going on with the targeting of President Trump and the attacks on our Republican form of government through the illicit use of the spy agencies targeting President Trump and other innocent, what I believe to be crime victims. Judicial Watch has nearly 50 lawsuits to expose this most massive corruption scandal in American history, and without that pressure, we're convinced that efforts to educate the American people on this and expose what went on would never take place otherwise. Congress obviously has been defanged because they're part of the problem now, and the administration is facing internal pressure not to release key information about the misconduct of the Obama administration and, frankly, Trump administration officials who continued the effort to overthrow the president. And with that, I'm going to open up our panel with the introductions. Joining us first here is Dr. Carter Page, who's founder and managing partner of Global Natural Gas Ventures. You may know Carter Page, obviously, as the target of those illicit FISA warrants used by both the Obama administration and the Trump Justice Department to spy on not only Mr. Page, but indirectly the Trump campaign. Dr. Page has decades of experience as a foreign policy scholar, including a 6-year term as a fellow at the Center for National Policy, where he focused on energy and foreign policy issues. He was a former Navy officer, had the top-level security clearance as well, and a graduate of Annapolis, so we're lucky to have him here. Victoria Toensing is a founding partner of the Washington, D.C. law firm of diGenova and Toensing. She is an internationally known expert on white-collar crime, terrorism, national security, and intelligence matters. And yes, she actually used to obtain FISA warrants when she worked at the Justice Department. So of all the people you see talking on TV, I think there's only maybe 1 or 2 have actually been involved in obtaining FISA warrants, and Victoria is one of them. Her work with her husband, Joe diGenova, I think is unheralded because you are representing folks that many people don't know about, and you really can't talk about, who have been victimized by the deep state, not only in this specific scandal, but you've seen the way whistleblowers have been treated generally by the government over the years. Also joining us is Chuck Ross, who's a preeminent investigative reporter at the Daily Caller News Foundation, where he covered the 2016 election and the Clinton email investigation, and he's one of the leading reporters covering the Trump-Russia investigation. His work has been cited by the New York Times, Washington Post, and Fox News. And more importantly, the Daily Caller News Foundation is being represented by Judicial Watch, I think, in a few lawsuits now, trying to get documents about some of the topics we're talking about. And my colleague, Chris Farrell, is Director of Investigations and Research for Judicial Watch, a member of our Board of Directors. He previously served as a counterintelligence officer for the United States Army, where he specialized, again, in counterintelligence and human intelligence. And Chris has been with Judicial Watch for 20 years now?
20 years.
Scary. Well, thank you for joining us, everybody. A lot to talk about. We've got a good hour to chunk and change to talk about it. And the way it will work is we'll make some intro remarks, and then we'll talk amongst ourselves. Carter, I'll start with you. You have a lot to say, I'm sure, but go ahead.
Well, Tom, first of all, a huge thanks to Judicial Watch. You literally have been a lifesaver, and I think as I describe some of the things that we've been through and the pathway ahead, I think that'll become clear. You've made a comment on, both in your introduction and over many months and over the last few years, that this attack, in terms of the civil rights abuses against myself, was not an attack on me. They were really trying to get at President Trump, candidate Trump, and then President-elect Trump, as a way of infiltrating his campaign. So similarly, again, I don't never view myself as a victim, but everyone on this panel, or all the organizations on this panel, were illegally surveilled. I think the first time I ever spoke or emailed with Chuck was he asked me questions in February of 2017, which was right after my first renewal. Had a few conversations with diGenova, Toensing, the top law firm, and Judicial Watch in terms of a few conversations as well. So we're really all victims in this. So the main focus, I think, we often get focused on spying, et cetera. To me, the bigger issue, and the thing I'm more concerned of, is literally the terrorism that was associated with this. Now, terrorism, you typically think of, assassinations or explosions, but really, if you look at the statutory definition of terrorism, it includes acts that are dangerous to human life. That's sort of the basis of it. And these false reports that were paid for by the DNC and the attacks which were distributed widely to the media, I received countless death threats related to this. And I know a lot of other members of the Trump movement had the same thing, but you just go down the list of all the elements of terrorism. Violations of criminal law, I think, as we're starting to see elements of that. And it's really about intimidating or coercing a civilian population. So that's a big issue. Unfortunately, as I said, it's been great to rely on the important work that Judicial Watch has done, but I have been a supporter of the FBI and a confidential source for them for many, many years. And unfortunately, I have a small graphic here, which is off the FBI's website, which is the FBI's priorities. When you look down every single one, they literally were doing the opposite of it during the witch hunt. So first of all, protect the US from a terrorist attack. Again, literally, I had asked the FBI for help about this, and I've asked repeatedly. To the contrary, they actually, the leaks were continuing after my meetings in March 2017. Going down the list, protecting U.S. against foreign intelligence operations. Well, we know that the DNC's conspiracy was all over that. Protecting against cyber attacks and high technology crimes. Again, we're all victims of that in terms of this illegal surveillance that was done. And combating public corruption. Again, these illicit payments, which Judicial Watch was able to uncover. Not only was the DNC's consultants getting paid, but this Mr. Christopher Steele in 2016, right up to and after the election, got 11 payments from the FBI. So literally a public official who is getting these illicit payments surreptitiously. Protecting civil rights, which is a joke. Obviously our civil rights were severely violated. And then really, transnational criminal organizations. This enterprise was exactly that. And I think, going back to this Investigate the Investigator, when we talk about major white-collar crime, we should find out a lot more about that over the period to come. So, again, thank you very much for doing this, and looking forward to the discussion.
Hey, thank you, Carter. Carter probably has a few claims or two he could be pursuing. I'm sure he is already. But Victoria, thanks for joining us. We're interested in your take on the latest. And James Comey's out in the news today as well. We should address that. So a lot going on as we speak even.
I'm embarrassed that the newspapers print what he writes because it's so trivial and unsophisticated. But the present Attorney General, Bill Barr, gave a marvelous interview to Bill Hammer a couple weeks ago. And he said something amazing to me. He said, when I became AG, I had started an inquiry. I started asking questions. And I have more questions today than I had before I became Attorney General. And that just blew me away. That, why wasn't Chris Wray over there saying, here's the answers, here's the answers. So I'm going to pose some questions that I have and see if anyone knows that they've been answered. Okay, Joseph Mifsud, is he really a Western agent and not a Russian agent, as we have come to, we are being told that he's a Western agent. But the Mueller report portrays him as a Russian agent. And George Papadopoulos said that when he said he was leaving this institute and going to the Trump campaign, that a woman who worked for the US government said to him, "Oh my goodness, you have to meet Mifsud. I'll fix it up. You must do it." And yet, why did the Mueller report say that George Papadopoulos contacted Mifsud? I mean, talk about misleading. Charles Tawil, Tawil, he's also a George Papadopoulos character. He pursued George to a Greek island where he was vacationing with his then fiancée, and he begged him to come to Israel. He had a business deal. He had to get work with him. And George goes to Israel, and he goes up to the guy's hotel room, and guess what? There's $10,000 in cash on the bed. George takes it. He protests a little bit, but he says, the guy says, "This is how I do business." So George takes it. His wise fiancée, now wife, said, "Leave it here in Greece." George gets on a plane, goes to Dulles, and is immediately surrounded by FBI agents. And, you know, people say that 99% of the FBI agents are good. What happened to these rank and file people who were participating in this? I want to know. My question is, what were they told was the basis for this stopping this man? And then they didn't have the 10 grand, so they had to make up a crime, and they put him in chains. I mean, my goodness. And they're calling back saying, "Oh my gosh, we don't have the 10 grand. Mike Flynn, who unmasked him? Who put that article in the Washington Post, because all David Ignatius is a typist for the Democratic Party? Who put that in? And it had to be a lawyer, and I'll tell you why I say that. Because the person told Ignatius to write about the Logan Act. Ignatius wouldn't know about the Logan Act, but he puts it, and I know journalists enough, you all can verify, if you're going to try to get something out there, you don't put it in the first paragraph. You bury it down so it can just be there as a little seed of destruction. That's where the Logan Act and Mike Flynn all came about. Well, who did that? And how about Andrew Wiseman? As head of the fraud section, which I was in charge of the fraud section as Deputy Assistant AG, I supervised the head of the fraud section. Why was he briefed on the dossier? It was out of his portfolio. There was no, he had no clearances.
This is before he was attended.
Thank you, Tom, for making that clear. In August of 2016, he was briefed on the dossier. And then he goes to Mueller, working with the same information that's in the dossier. Why wasn't that a conflict?
Right.
And I have my last question, and here it is. There's only two ways that I know of that the government can get information on U.S. citizens, and that is they go to NSA, which is collected. They've got all kinds of things. They've got a world full of information at NSA, and you go knock on the door and you say, "I want to know everything about Carter Page," and then I have a reason to do so. Or you can go to the FISA court and say, "I want to have surveillance on Carter Page," and then you get whatever you're producing. So when the good Mike Rogers, I call him, Admiral Rogers, went to the FISA court and found out all the violations that had started since 2012 by the Obama administration. And in April of 2016, he cut off all the FBI contractors' ability to access FISA material. Is it then, Carter, because they couldn't go knock on the door, as they had been doing, getting the information? Is it then that they started to focus on you and George for FISA warrants? And is that why it turned in the other direction?
Well, just to provide some context here, you know, Carter was a cooperator with the government. You were helping the FBI go after the Russians. Of course, this doesn't come across in the Mueller. In fact, the fact they leave it out shows you the dishonesty of the Mueller report.
Sin by omission.
And the FISA issue that you raised, the FBI contractors, explain what the issue is behind there, where you had, I guess, people who weren't read in, reviewing.
Contractors were not supposed to have access to 702 U.S. person information.
Reviewing spy material on Americans, right?
Yeah. And why are they still anonymous? Why don't we know who those contractors are?
So in many ways, this goes beyond even the targeting of Trump. There are others, in a sense, as well, even outside the Russia scandal. Chuck Ross, you're one of the few reporters who honestly reviews the primary documents out there, so I commend you for that. others just mimic talking points or just stenographers for the deep state, as I call it. But Chuck, give us your take on where we stand today and what might be coming next.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here for sure. And you mentioned earlier in your intro that you guys are representing me, Daily Caller News Foundation, in a lawsuit, a few lawsuits. The one I'm most excited about kind of fits into this investigating the investigators theme that we have. Although it's for the State Department, so State Department aren't technically investigators, but it's a lawsuit I'm pretty excited about because we're looking at, you guys are helping us look for all the communications between Christopher Steele and State Department officials regarding the dossier, and even before. We're looking for the 100 or so reports that Christopher Steele allegedly provided the State Department to, and the State Department has claimed that Steele was a reliable source, and that kind of fed into the narrative that the FBI said that he's a reliable source, and they've used his documentation to further the collusion investigation. So really excited about that. I think that the State Department, you've had a few Republican congressmen and a few watchdogs and other people in the media point out the State Department's role, but I think they played a significant role in the early days of disseminating the dossier, disseminating Christopher Steele's work, and also at least one State Department official served as a source for the media for the infamous article about Carter Page here, the Michael Isikoff article. A guy named Jonathan Weiner was a source for that article and for subsequent articles that were intended to bolster the allegations of the dossier, which we now have been all but debunked by the Mueller report. So, I focus a lot on the dossier in my reporting. I just think it's, despite the spin that has emerged over the past couple years, I still think it's just the central document to this whole investigation. James Comey and others, and Comey in his op-ed yesterday, rehashed the argument that the dossier wasn't the spark for the investigation, which maybe that's technically true, but there are a couple of problems with that, and I think that's something that we need to look into. From my perspective as a journalist, Judicial Watch as a watchdog group, there were activities before Crossfire Hurricane kicked off. We have informants, Stefan Halper, who met with Carter here 3 weeks before the investigation formally kicked off. You had Loretta Lynch and James Comey discussing Carter actually in the spring of 2016. So this is before the investigation officially commences. They're at least thinking about looking into Carter and the campaign and other people. So we need to figure out why what happened, what was the catalyst for that. And then, as I mentioned, we have Stefan Halper, who was a longtime FBI informant, who was up to something in the weeks before Crossfire Hurricane opened. And then the dossier enters the picture, at least as far as being provided to the FBI sometime in September of 2016. So if the dossier wasn't the catalyst of Crossfire Hurricane, it was at least the engine that drove this idea that there was collusion between Trump associates and the campaign. It also has fueled, and I think this is more important actually, it's fueled the media narrative over the last 2 years. I mean, this has literally placed a cloud over the Trump administration and innocent people as well outside of the administration, Carter included. We have to look at how that came about, why the media, and I'm not saying investigate the media in terms of criminal investigation, but media watchdogs, reporters like myself need to take a harder look at what the media got wrong, why they appear to have fallen for this false narrative, and all of this is kind of with an eye on trying to prevent it from happening again. We went through a debacle in the lead up to the Iraq War, where there was false intelligence that led the drumbeats of war, and that happened. So we had to take a step back and figure out why we got into that. And there's a similar situation, I believe, here, in the sense that this information that is false was perpetuated, pushed through the media, and was used to plant a cloud over the Trump administration.
Well, you know,
I'd like to make one legal point,
Yeah,
just
sure.
while, because Chuck just said that Steele was reliable. I practiced Fourth Amendment law for about 5 years as an assistant U.S. attorney. It's not the provider of the information that has to be reliable. It's the people that he or she gets the information from. And there was no basis to support one iota of anybody that Steele got information from was reliable.
Chuck, you kind of talked about this a little bit. I think an uncomfortable truth for the media is there's no media exception to the Espionage Act. So in my view, you had media organizations like the Washington Post and New York Times that were knowingly publishing classified information. They admitted they were publishing classified information. And the same way Julian Assange has been targeted for prosecution, these same folks arguably could be. Do I think that's going to happen or should happen? Probably not. But certainly these media entities are witnesses to crimes, and they know who the crooks are in the Obama and Trump administrations who are unlawfully leaking this classified information, targeting you and targeting Flynn and targeting President Trump and others in a way that makes them unable, I think, to fairly report on it without acknowledging this role they've had in helping this misconduct take place, this government misconduct take place. Chris, is it fair to call you a spy?
Probably, yeah.
Did you spy?
I think so.
Were you a spy when you worked for the Army? Well, we're lucky to have here because here's someone who ran counterintelligence operations and who knows what the rules are and has some pretty strong opinions as to how the rules were violated. Chris Farrell, who's the Director of Investigations at Judicial Watch.
Tom, this is a great panel, and it's wonderful to have such bright, smart people who know what they're talking about instead of the usual commentators opining about things. We have folks here with direct knowledge of what was going on and how it's done. And your opening is correct. I've had the great fortune of running very successful counterespionage investigations defensively, but also offensively running double agent operations for the Army. So I'm not guessing at this. I've done it for a living. I know firsthand exactly how this is done, what the procedures are, both from a tradecraft point of view, but also the legal process standard for how these operations are, formulated, predicated, and then launched, and how they're conducted. The average citizen, I think, having seen the Mueller report, knows that something very horrible went terribly wrong, that they've been lied to. The average American citizen, just kind of even dipping into the story occasionally, knows that for 2+ years, a hoax has been perpetrated upon them, and they've been lied to and manipulated. And that's really the net of the Mueller report. Attorney General Barr has, I think, wisely and aptly described it as spying with respect to how law enforcement and the intelligence services were used in a way that I can tell you is outrageously beyond the pale, like nothing else we've ever seen in the history of the United States government. No law enforcement agencies, officers, no intelligence officers have not just sort of stretched or gone to the margin trying to aggressively pursue an operation. That I've seen, and in some cases it's entirely appropriate. But these folks are so far out of bounds and so beyond the pale. When people talk about it being a coup, there's no exaggeration there. It was a coup. It was an effort to unseat or destabilize the Trump administration, the president personally, but actually his entire administration. And we've never seen anything like it. This makes, pick your favorite scandal, Watergate, Whitewater, whatever. It makes all that look like Keystone Cops. This is a very sophisticated, very thought out, not just lawfare in the sense of using law enforcement and the legal system, Department of Justice and FBI, but also the intelligence apparatus, like we've never seen before. The thought experiment I like to use with people is take the same caliber of persons in the Department of Justice and the FBI, the same rank, authority, the same kind of, assistant secretary type folks, lift that up, move it over, and drop it into the Pentagon. People would call that a coup. I mean, right. We don't have tanks in the street.
If generals and colonels were talking about wearing a wire and removing the president,
right.
You would call it a coup
right.
pretty easily.
And there's no tanks in the street, and
right.
Obviously there's an enormous difference, but I'm talking about the same sort of caliber and power being exercised in a way to unlawfully go after the president and his entire administration. One thing that I would like to raise for our discussion also, I think is very important, and I'll close with this, and that is there's a very important text message from Lisa Page to Peter Strzok in September of 2016. And the context for the text message is Strzok asks Lisa Page, hey, what are you doing? Or words to that effect. She reports back very excitedly that she's preparing talking points for Director Comey to go brief the president on what they're doing. And the quote from Lisa Page is, quote, POTUS wants to know everything we're doing, close quote. That POTUS, of course, is Barack Obama.
Yeah.
And I will take Lisa Page at her word. It's a off-the-cuff communication with her paramour. She's excited. She's getting the director prepped. I want to know, what did Obama know? What did he approve? What did he tacitly nod his head for? What did he explicitly authorize? This entire, it's a tragedy. It's a scandal we've never seen before constitutionally. This rests entirely on Mr. Obama and his administration. It starts with them, and we want real accountability. Let's get Mr. Obama under oath.
Well, you know, it's a good segue because both the discussions about the dossier and investigating the so-called investigators. So the infamous ambush that Comey had made, the infamous ambush that Comey did against then President-elect Trump just before he was inaugurated, where he confronted him with the dossier. Turns out the FBI was nervous, saying, well, it looks like you're trying to blackmail him. Well, telling the truth, I guess, was no hurdle to get
No, but it was the thing to do so that Clapper could go tell CNN.
Right. But before that took place, there was a meeting at which that ambush was discussed in the Oval Office with Barack Obama, Vice President Biden, Brennan, I recall,
Yep.
Susan Rice,
Sally Yates.
I'm sure, I don't remember if Sally Yates was there, but Comey was there, obviously, and they all talked about the dossier and going to visit the president-elect with it. And based on what Comey said, the president said, good luck, have good luck with that. So, and then if you've read Simpson's testimony, and on top of what Obama knew, what did Mrs. Clinton know? Simpson was asked on the Hill, what did you tell your clients about this Russia info, this intel? And he refused to answer. He cited some privilege. I don't know what the privilege is, you know, political hack privilege. I don't know what the privilege is. But Hillary Clinton's never been asked about this in any serious way. Certainly her lawyers haven't been asked about this. So there's this category of folks that haven't even been asked by the media about their involvement in this. And I want to, I guess, your reaction to that as to why is it the top leader, the White House of President Obama have been immune from scrutiny here?
It's funny.
And of course, Carter, you were in the sites there. I can't imagine the president didn't know that there were 3 or 4 FISA warrants targeting you.
Well, it's funny you asked that. A couple days later, on January 10th, the morning of January 10th, 2017, I went to a breakfast at the Council on Foreign Relations. It was actually an on-the-record breakfast that was live streamed. And Lisa Monaco, who was the working in the Obama White House at the time, you know, there was a big article that day in the New York Times by Robbie Mook, you know, the Clinton campaign manager, and he's talking about Watergate. And, you know, I asked her questions about the FISA process, and, you know, there's been various allegations. Of course, she completely, you know, dodged the question, but I tried asking that question directly, and I've been asking, you know, I've put in FOIA requests, Privacy Act of 1974 requests, great questions. I have no idea. So,
Carter, one thing that is interesting is that we have Andy McCabe, his desk calendar, showing that he was running over to the White House to brief Lisa Monaco. So there's a direct connection there.
Do you know the date?
Off the top of my head, no, but we do have those records.
But, you know, we talk about the deep state, but isn't this really the top state we need to be worried about at the DOJ, FBI, CIA, et cetera, the Obama White House, Victoria?
Oh, yes, but there still is a deep state.
right.
I mean, because I've seen it where things are being ordered to be done, and people just take their time to
That's
do
why
it.
there's
So
this
there's people.
That's why there's this declassification order, because of the obstruction from
Well, and
seditious
that's
individuals inside the
a
administration.
deep state and a head state. That's Chris Wray. I mean, Chris Wray was stonewalling the Attorney General, for goodness sake. And so you can envision Bill Barr saying to the president, you want me to uncover this stuff? I got to have people give me the documents. Chris Wray, I've been told by various people, wants to protect the FBI because if it's known what they really did, he thinks it's going to go bye-bye. I say you've got to clean it out to protect it. We've been COINTELPRO, way back in the days when it was just being used against bad guys. They were overdoing bad guys.
Can Durham and AG Barr trust the FBI to allow it to be involved in these investigations? Is there a conflict there?
I'm sure they can find some agents there. I mean, of course there's honest agents, but I was pointing out during my intro, how about those agents that surrounded George Papadopoulos when he landed? What were they told? Why was this guy going to have 10 grand on him?
Well, just think about the Papadopoulos operation, Chuck, where you had the FBI, this woman who we don't know who she worked for. Maybe it was the FBI, maybe it was CIA, it was a government operator. So it's taking place overseas. So you had the FBI, the DOJ. Stephen Halper was paid with Defense Department funds. That's, he made money from the Defense Department. Obviously, an overseas operation like that would involve the State Department. So you have this multi-agency operation targeting a presidential campaign. It certainly highlights the need for the Attorney General to be able to access all of these agency documents quickly to figure out what went on in that specific spy case. But get back to the address that obviously. But I mean, you're a media guy. I guess Barack Obama is going to put you on his sole interview list. But am I wrong in suggesting the media hasn't asked President Obama one question about this, more or less?
Yeah, to my knowledge, he's not been asked this, and I don't know if he's just been cleverly avoided it or if the reporters don't want to take the initiative to ask him these questions. To jump back real quick on George Papadopoulos, and then also tying in, you mentioned Joseph Mifsud. Devin Nunes has raised a really interesting point in a letter, I think, last month he sent to the FBI and Attorney General. He wants to find out, Mueller claims that Mifsud was a Russian asset. But we know for a fact that Mifsud was working for institutions that have much stronger ties to Western intelligence agencies. So Devin Nunes raised the question of, okay, well, if Mifsud is a Russian asset, as you claim, then that creates a huge counterintelligence problem for all of these Western institutions and our own State Department, who Mifsud visited in 2017. Creates a huge counterintelligence problem. So they need to tell us, like, which is it? What is he? Either he was a Russian asset, which there's really no evidence to support that, then that's the problem. And if he was not a Russian asset, if he was affiliated with Western intelligence, what was he up to? What was he doing? And so George Papadopoulos, I mean, there were so many just really strange interactions that he had. I mean, that's understating it. I mean, he had Halper, and then you mentioned the Ozra Turk, the alias Ozra Turk, who we don't know if she's FBI, if she's CIA.
But if you're Attorney General,
Yeah.
and you sit there and you say, I want to know tomorrow morning who's Azaturk.
Yeah.
I want to know if Mifsud, shouldn't you be getting those answers
Yeah.
the very next morning?
It's pretty clear he
somebody?
hasn't been getting the answers. People should understand that the Attorney General seeking this authority from the President suggests the corruption continues, that he's facing corruption internally, that he needs to try to bypass by getting authority to declassify information and get over the bureaucratic roadblocks that have been put in place to
And
protect
that's
these
why
agencies from
he
scrutiny.
was blessed with this authority.
Let's hope he uses it. Chris, you've made the point.
He will.
Yeah, and then you could use it and still have the fight. And AG Barr needs a lot of prayers and support because he's going to continue to face strong opposition even with this authority. As we know, the president saying something should happen, as far as the deep state is concerned, that's something to be taken into account, but is not just positive.
For the media going along with this would never happen.
Right. Well, that's true. Well, the media is complicit.
But I mean,
Too much of the media is complicit.
they're
Obviously, some
chiming
media
in
isn't.
on trying
Chuck,
to.
I don't know everything you've done, but yeah.
Well, they're trying to taint Bill Barr. I mean, if you go listen to CNN for 2 minutes, if you can stand it, or MSNBC, it's like, well, Bill Barr, is he to be trusted with classified information? Well, yeah, he worked at the CIA. He's got his clearances. I bet he is.
I'd like to can I make a point on that, actually? Sorry, I know you're, just real quick. So John Brennan has come out on Friday after the declassification authorization. Brennan comes out and the talking point, all of a sudden their talking point was, well, we have to worry about sensitive sources and methods being leaked. Now, first of all, there's no indication that Barr is just going to willy-nilly, as Brennan used that term, willy-nilly, just release these crown jewels. He's not going to do that. But also,
it's the same hysteria that they invoked with the Devin Nunes
Exactly.
4-page memo, and they would have you believe that they're going to, explain to the world intelligence collection methods, which is not the case at all.
Right.
All they're going to do is expose and reveal what bad actors did what things and communicated with who. And the notion that that would somehow endanger our intelligence collection capability does not pass the giggle test.
But the Mueller report cannot be appreciated unless its entire the
Right.
grand jury material is released.
The hypocrisy, I mean, it is the definition of hypocrisy.
Chris, I want you to emphasize the point you've made previously about the reasons they might be nervous about this material coming out, which is the unlawful surveillance of domestic political operations.
Yeah, so this is a really important thing, and it seems like it's down in the weeds, but it's not. So there's an executive order governing intelligence activities. It's Executive Order 12333, and there's one section in there called Section 209, and there's a specific prohibition in this section about undisclosed participation in U.S. organizations in the United States. That's a long title, but basically what it means is that intelligence and law enforcement, principally intelligence, cannot run penetration operations against U.S. entities. This is sort of an emotional, legal intelligence hangover from Students for Democratic Society in 1968. The FBI convinced the Army to run assets, to run agents against SDS, a militant group that blew up post offices and campuses and stuff. So there was this problem in the 60s that was reformed. Intelligence services were told you cannot penetrate U.S. organizations in the United States. Well, what do you think these guys were doing at FBI and DOJ? What are the Peter Strzok's and Comey, what are they doing? Well, they're going after a political campaign, right? And they're using intelligence assets, techniques, tradecraft to do so. So there's a prohibition on that. One way around it is to get an attorney general letter. And do you really think they're going to go to Loretta Lynch and get a letter authorizing them to run an operation against the Trump campaign? No, for a variety of reasons. They didn't trust her. They didn't want a piece of paper floating around authorizing that. There's lots of reasons not to do it. So how do you do it? How do you run an operation against a political campaign? And the answer is you create a foreign counterintelligence event. And how do they do that? Well, he's sitting at the end of the table, right? They bring you to the United Kingdom to go to a conference, right? Papadopoulos again overseas. And so they have this event, this activity overseas that they then say, oh, look, we're reacting to a foreign counterintelligence situation. We didn't run an offensive operation domestically. We're reacting to an external foreign event. And then once they have this event occur in the UK, which is the safest operating environment for them, they then import the whole event, the whole operation, back into the United States. And it absolves them of violating the executive order. It makes it legal. I mean, it's legal in the sense of legal positivism. It's legal because we say it's legal. So it's a trick or technique, but they knew exactly what they were doing. I mean, this is a very thoughtful effort to do an end run around the legal constraints that did not allow them to run a penetration operation against the political campaign, a transition team, and an administration. And the only way to do it, that's why there's all this, why would they have all this activity in the UK? Why would they have this guy Gaeta
Because it was illegal.
from the Legat in Rome flying around handling? They had to have it start overseas. That's the only way to launder it and make it legit. And it's a critical piece of the story, and it gets glossed over because everyone focuses on I mean,
But
there's a lot of other stuff to focus on, but it's a key point.
Let me take the continuation of that
Sure.
from the legal standpoint. And that is then when Rod Rosenstein brought in the counterintelligence investigation, authorizing Bob Mueller to do not a criminal investigation, but a counterintelligence investigation, that's a whole different kind of investigation. If there's a bank robbery, you go and you got a limited group of people and you say, where's the bank robbery? But the counterintelligence, I can tell you, say we've represented people, I can tell you, I felt hands of Republican businessmen who have traveled in Eastern Europe, and they were all braced by the FBI, having nothing whatsoever to do with anything. Did they travel to Ukraine once in 2016, 2017, even 2015, late 2015? Oh, excuse me, FBI, we want to talk to you. They have to get lawyers, they have to go get all their kinds of documents. This is what the Mueller people did, because by having it counterintelligence, it just spread out bigger than any criminal investigation could ever be.
I mean, the way the rule of law was thrown out to target Trump, no one's above the law. The president shouldn't be above the law. But the argument is that he's beneath the protection of the law because we don't like him personally here in Washington, D.C. And Carter Page, they don't think much of you, so they didn't care about the victimization of you. But my guess is, I don't want to give anyone bad ideas, but you got to be careful about traveling overseas now. There are probably some bad guys and good guys who want to watch what you're doing, or worse, as a result of this government misconduct directed at you. Am I wrong in that regard in terms of you being a victim here?
Well, I think there's a way to get around that, and we saw that from Mr. Steele, right? He's a person, as Judicial Watch was able to uncover, he got paid 11 times in 2016 for basically doing what I was doing, providing the FBI as a unpaid volunteer. Meanwhile, he's also getting paid by the DNC, and he has these financial ties to Russian oligarchs with ties to the Kremlin. So, I mean, Chris, exactly as you're saying, you talk about this going back to the mission statement, it's to combat transnational crime, but exactly as you're alluding to, it was really creating
engaging in it.
But just a final point on that, in terms of being a supporter of the operations, I not only you alluded to that they left that fact out of the Mueller report, they actually spun it around the other way. All the tens of pages that were written about me were spun in a way to sort of portray me as more someone they're keeping an eye on, as opposed to someone who's helping. And I think it goes back to what we're talking about, of people having differences of opinion, and they decide, well, we're going to focus on him because he's a supporter of the Trump movement. So.
And at the same time, Hillary Clinton is working directly with Russia intelligence through her cutout, Christopher Steele, to try to destroy then candidate Trump and keep on pushing against President Trump. And the idea that Mueller would look into Russia interference on our elections and you actually use that relationship to target people is just extraordinary. And I just want to promote Judicial Watch here, not because I like promoting Judicial Watch, which I do.
Well, you should.
But because it's just remarkable here in town how little has been done but for Judicial Watch in investigating this. FISA warrants, we got the FISA warrant applications as a result of FOIA lawsuits. The FISA payments that you highlight, or the payments to Christopher Steele that we uncovered. The fact he was fired that we uncovered through FISA, through the FOIA cases. No FISA court hearings. Now I know they often don't have the hearings, but they had 4 warrant applications targeting then a presidential candidate and then the President of the United States, and not one of those 4 judges deemed to bring in the government for an official hearing. Because we asked for the transcripts, they finally admitted there were no hearings. State Department collaborated with Orr to get Trump. That's documents we just uncovered. Orr and his wife, Nellie Orr, a communication, Nellie gets an email from Orr, I'll delete the emails you asked me to delete, on Russia, it looks like. The Orr communications with Christopher Steele. Steele gets fired. Bruce Orr of the Justice Department, tasked by the FBI to keep open this pathway for information from Christopher Steele. 60 communications in late 2016, 2017. State Department pushing classified information to their friendlies in the Senate, both Republican and Democrat, who are anti-Trump, And the news out of that was the email was, we made the deadline. What was the deadline? The inauguration of President Trump. And on top of that, we've got ongoing lawsuits about the Brennan leaks and things like that. And all of this is coming not because the media is getting this information, as I noticed, complicit. Congress has been instrumental, but not even institutionally, because I believe it's individuals in Congress more responsible, like Devin Nunes, who's taking a personal role in this, and Mark Meadows and Jim Jordan. Frankly, but for them and Trey Gowdy to a certain extent, none of this information we have in a Nunes memo and follow-up questioning of these individuals.
Paul Ryan wouldn't help them.
That's right.
Paul Ryan was an obstructionist for a long time.
They had to take individual initiative over the objections of the leadership. We should remember these are individuals who took these steps, not quote Congress. It's a remarkable failure. Forget about the media. The media is the media. But our government is failing the people in providing a check on itself. And this is where Judicial Watch comes in. Your whistleblowing, your legal work, your reporting, obviously your work at Judicial Watch and covering this. Where would we be but for this type of activism by this lonely group of individuals?
But it's also, I go back to the mission and the priorities for the FBI. They're really, there's a national security element to this. And I'm not the only one that got these death threats from Oklahoma and elsewhere. And I've asked, going back many months, even those initial meetings in March 2017, that was all I wanted. I wanted to help the truth get out there in terms of all this damage that it's done to the new Trump administration. But I also asked for some security support. And they actually did the opposite. They had these additional leaks in April of 2017 to Devlin Barrett at the Washington Post and, a lot of other follow-ups like that. So,
the president's a crime victim here, Victoria. Do you agree?
Oh, yes. Well, he's had his civil rights violated.
In the least.
Yes.
Do you think, I'm talking about all this information that's coming out. What's going on at the U.S. Department of Justice that you can tell us about, if you know?
Oh, well, there's a new day.
I mean, should we be
the day when Bill Barr
hopeful?
walked in there, people knew to get serious. Remember, there was a career people who told Jeff Sessions he had to recuse himself here and there and doing all this stuff. They didn't tell Bill Barr he had to recuse himself from the Russian investigation, did they? They knew. They knew. There is a new sheriff in town. And Bill Barr, he loves the law. I mean, this is not about Donald Trump. All these people want to make it like that. I don't know, how he feels about Donald Trump, but he loves the law and the Constitution.
My concern is that they're the rank and file career staff within justice. I think of them as sort of an army of Sally Yateses. That not all of them, but there's an enormous sort of institutional cant to the left if you wander through the Department of Justice. And so my concern is that Attorney General Barr can endeavor to do the right thing, but as Whitaker Chambers famously said, you don't have to actually engage in any kind of sabotage. You just make a couple of mistakes, right? And so you have people, burrow down at the third and fourth tier at the Justice Department that will have their heels dug in and resist. Meanwhile, he's got Christopher Wray at the FBI, and he's all about damage control and institutional preservation. Those are his priorities when he really needs to be cleaning house. So I'm always leery that we put a lot of faith and hope in someone like Attorney General Barr, who is indicating all the right things, but I never want to discount, the army of, functionaries beneath them that sabotage, stall, delay,
He was always
forget.
thus at the Justice Department.
Yeah.
I was there as a Republican, and that's not the best place to be as a Republican, because I knew all the people I was supervising.
But it's just a cautionary
were
thing that I
against
worry
me.
about.
Yeah,
We
no.
always want the government to do the right thing, but the Judicial Watch doesn't give up. That's why we sue, because we're just not going to rely on them to do the right thing. We just have to be sure there's this backstop for accountability. Chuck, could you give us some insight, address as you see fit what you've heard, as to what's going on with Congress and impeachment and the document fights, and where do you expect that's going to lead?
I don't have a lot of insight into what Democrats are up to. They don't talk to me much. I just see what's on TV and what's reported elsewhere. I mean, I think that you see this kind of back and forth with Schiff and Nadler. They're both kind of 1 week, one will be out front calling for, impeachment and contempt against Barr, and then the next one will come in the next week. And they're just ratcheting up to the point where they're going to either hold Barr in contempt for something or try to impeach President Trump. I mean, I think the fight will actually, Robert Mueller is supposed to give a press conference today about something.
With no questions. A press
yeah,
conference
no
with
questions.
no questions.
Maybe that's a game changer. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But I mean, I'm keeping my eye on what Republicans are still doing. We still have this. Republicans still have Senate Judiciary Committee. Chuck Grassley is still doing a lot of work to try to get documents related to the dossier and the origins of the investigation. Devin Nunes, even though he's in the minority, he doesn't have a lot of power. He's still, sending letters, raising questions about origins of the investigation and things like that. So, I think it's, as Chris was saying, I mean, there's a lot of resistance within DOJ to produce, and probably CIA as well, to produce these documents. And one funny thing, actually, one FBI Justice Department lawyer, Kevin Kleinsmith, he's the one who sent the Viva la Resistance text message to one of the FBI lawyers. It's mentioned in the last IG report. I mean, that kind of shows you what's. I mean, he literally used the word resistance.
Yeah.
I mean,
And it's not just declassification issues. I mean, we have Orr's notes where he's talking to Glenn Simpson, and Simpson gives him a list of intermediaries he was using, evidently targeting Trump. That's blacked out. It's not because it was classified. It's because it was in something else.
Yeah.
And the FBI is refusing to turn over text messages under FOIA. They believe they shouldn't have to search FBI text messages under FOIA. So McCabe, Strzok, and Page, none of their text messages would be reviewable under Wray's interpretation of FOIA law. And at the same time, and I think Barr, if he does an adequate investigation, necessarily has to investigate the handling of the Clinton email, because that is the genesis of the targeting of Trump. You distract from one by targeting the other. They're both sides of the same coin, and this Justice Department is viciously protecting Hillary Clinton in court against Judicial Watch now. People don't understand this, but we're in discovery, getting information on the Clinton email issue from email witnesses in her State Department and people close to her, and we're being fought tooth and nail by this Justice Department and this State Department. Still. So this is a leadership issue, I understand, when you're trying to get declassified documents, but the everyday operations of the Justice Department and the FBI continue to stand against efforts of accountability. And Clinton and the Russiagate, you can't separate Clinton email from Russiagate, because one was you targeted Trump to protect Clinton from the consequences of her email misconduct.
I mean, the thought from their perspective is, if you look at the famous July 5th, 2016 briefing by Comey, where he made up this notion of their requirement for intent to be a part of the crime of mishandling of national defense information. They could not accept the notion that the Democratic nominee was going to be indicted for national security crimes. That's what a legitimate investigation would have resulted in. 18 U.S.C. Section 793F. I know it very, very well. And so if she was charged with that, indicted in July or August, and now she's going to go run for president 2 months later, right? It is unimaginable to them. So an effort to thwart that, and then an effort to destroy Trump simultaneously to offset the damage done by the entire server story. And I think another huge part of this that feeds into the crazy hoax narrative. People will remember the Trump Tower visit by Veselnitskaya, the Russian attorney. Well, who did Veselnitskaya meet with the morning of her visit to the Trump Tower? Glenn Simpson of Fusion GPS. And who did she meet with the day after her visit to Trump Tower? Glenn Simpson, Fusion GPS. In the intelligence world, that's called dispatch and recovery, right? You dispatch your asset, they do what they got to do operationally, they pop back out on the other end, and you debrief them as to who did you meet, what did they say, and the only thing they wanted to do, is put that woman in Trump Tower with those people. They didn't care what was said, what was done, what was promised. They just needed to make the contact between the two persons, because it then facilitated 2 years of screaming Russia, Russia, Russia.
And that meeting was part of it. But do you think that they just got their sea legs in 2016?
Of course not.
I don't. The Obama administration has been doing these kinds of things since 2012, as far as we know. What about that Russian woman that was set up with Mike Flynn? Do you think that wasn't an operation? And that was in 2014, because Mike Flynn was a thorn in the side of the Obama administration.
Absolutely. Yep.
This is their modus operandi. Washington Post, I have a message for you. Democracy dies in darkness.
Well, you know, I know the president has this awesome declassification authority as head of the executive branch, but constitutionally he also has this pardon power. And if I were him, I would exercise it broadly for those Americans improperly caught up in this. Carter, what next for you? We just have a few minutes left. What's your you have litigation, and
Yes.
The Democrats want to talk to you again 15 times?
I have been pushing. I have had a lawsuit against the DNC, and it's funny. I've been a law student learning the law as well, and the false statements that they made in the FISA court, the DNC, through their various intermediaries, it's been followed in the time since. And so I think, I'm hoping that this will be a turning point, but it's been a real uphill battle. But, it's been a life or death situation. And again, Judicial Watch has, when the FBI fell down in doing their main mission as opposed to just protecting their fellow Washington lawyers, you guys have been on the front line. So we'll have to wait and see, but I'm going to keep fighting the good fight.
I think it's fair to say that the number one question we probably all get from everyday Americans is anyone going to go to jail?
Yeah, it is. That is.
Meaning people involved in the misconduct targeting Trump.
I hope so. And I know some people come out and say, oh, no, I don't want anyone to go to jail. Yes, because our Constitution was violated. They weaponized the tools that we use to keep this country secure, the intelligence tools. They weaponized them, and law enforcement tools. And that has to be shown to people that cannot ever happen again.
Chuck, as a reporter, you often are in a position to see stories on the horizon or stories that are being underplayed that you think will get more attention in the future. Can you highlight some of that for us as we close?
Yeah, well, I just think kind of what we've been talking about, we're going to probably see a lot more come out about the informants that were used, including Steele, Stefan Halper down the road, and that depends a lot on what is declassified, I guess. But I expect a lot more developments on that. Of course, the IG's report is expected to, the chatter around, I'm not from Washington, but the chatter around Washington I hear is that it's going to be pretty good.
Washington, Chuck. You're not here.
I'm on
Jeez Louise.
I'm on Twitter, so I'm basically from Washington. So
Washington's a state of mind.
yeah, that's of course going to be something to watch out for, and so we'll be chasing those threads once that comes out for the foreseeable future, and then of course the FOIA lawsuit. Michael Bekesha, the main lawyer on that, told me that we have another 2 years worth of documents down there, which is par for the course with government productions.
Slow, but if no one else is doing it, we still be making news 2 years from now.
Right.
Chris, lots of FOIAs and lawsuits in the offing, as I guess.
Lots and lots, and as you well know, we never forget, we never quit. We're extraordinarily persistent. As you know, there's FOIA cases we have that are 16 years old. And we just never give up, which makes some people crazy.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing as far as I'm concerned.
Well, we've gone international. We've asked both the Australian governments and the British governments for documents on the spy effort, and we're getting the same runaround we're getting here in the United States. So it was an international coup cabal in some ways, targeting President Trump. And I have to hand it to the president that he, despite his victimization, has been able to function in his job to the extent he's been able, because there's been no one else in American history targeted like this president. That's not a political statement, that's a fact. And it ought to be very concerning to any American who wants a Republican form of government as opposed to a government run by political appointees and bureaucrats who think they know better than the American people in terms of deciding who gets to be president, how they exercise their power and authority. And frankly, Mr. Mueller needs to be reminded of that now and again as well. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us here on our Judicial Watch special panel. We'll be rerunning it, obviously, online, and certainly come to Judicial Watch's website at judicialwatch.org, where you can find out how to get the transcript as it's created in the next few weeks. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.